is there cause for concern that would warrant an investigation, at least, into the use of explosives? Didn't do it, won't do it, can't get him to do it. Demolition waves remove column supports. That's how we get this to happen. How do we do that? We have 24 core columns in this building. They have to be removed essentially simultaneously, within a fraction of a second, on each floor, synchronistically timed, in order to bring this building straight down. Any deviation from that pattern, the building will begin to tip, as it does in a natural process. Can fire achieve that level of precision? Do we have a free fall speed through the path of greatest resistance? Let's take a look. We can see the building gaining downward momentum with each second. The distance is increasing over time. You can log it on a drop distance versus time. Fits the free fall curve almost precisely. In fact, NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, ultimately acknowledges the free fall speed of the acceleration of this building in 8 stories of it, 100 feet in the first, or nearly the first 2¼ seconds. This is acknowledged finally by them when challenged publicly by David Chandler, Stephen Jones, and they do not acknowledge the obvious implication of such free fall acceleration, which means the columns have to have been removed. Why? Because the building can't fall as fast as a brick falling off the top of it and crush 40,000 tons of structural steel. It's got to slow down if that's going to happen. That's the physics of it. Nobody argues with that, by the way. They just don't acknowledge it. Total dismemberment of steel structure. We had a 47-story skyscraper collapsing like a house of cards into a pile just 4, 5, 6 stories high in a haystack pile. This can't happen in a moment steel frame resisting structure. Very rigidly welded beams to columns in the perimeter steel frame. Remember, buildings that fall over, we see what's essentially a building at the base. The individual structural steel elements are not dismembered from each other. The concrete is not pulverized. Do we have sounds of explosions? Let's listen to this witness, Barry Jennings, occupant of the 23rd floor, who went back in after everybody else had been evacuated. He goes back in. What does he say?
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That sound I thought was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor, I heard some more explosions. You know,
What's the sound?
like a boom, like an explosion.
A lot of explosions. How about this gentleman, New York Police Department whistleblower Craig Bartner?
And the whole time you hear boom, 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 boom. So, I think I know an explosion when I hear it.
None of these explosions are a part of the official story. How about this gentleman, Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic?
And then it was like another 2-3 seconds. You heard explosions, like boom. And it's like a distinct sound. It's not like when the compression, like boom, 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 like floors that were dropping and collapsing. This was boom, and like you felt a rumble in the ground, like almost like you wanted to grab onto something. To me, I knew that was an explosion.
Why didn't this evidence of explosives, this eyewitness testimony, make it into the 9/11 Commission report? Oh, the 9/11 Commission report, 571 pages of it, did not have one mention of the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history. What kind of explosions are we talking about?
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
That was on the afternoon of 9/11. Do we have enormous pyroclastic clouds of pulverized concrete? Well, watch the expanding gases racing away from Building 7 at 35 miles an hour in every direction, propelled by this incredible heat. Where's all that heat coming from? The 8 to 10 small, isolated pockets of fire in the building? We'll take a look where the source of that heat might be in just a moment. Do we have pools of molten iron? Interesting. The story gets thicker. This section applies to the Twin Towers as well. as we see pouring out of the south tower 10 minutes prior to its collapse, molten iron. Turns out to be molten iron, I'll show you. It's certainly molten metal. NIST says it's molten aluminum from the airplane. Problem is, molten aluminum looks like molten aluminum. It's silvery. It doesn't glow bright yellow, bright orange in daylight conditions. So it's not molten aluminum. Who says this? As if 21 days after the attack, the fires were still burning and molten steel was still running. None other than Leslie Robertson, the structural engineer at the World Trade Center himself, to a conference of structural engineers in October. Fires burned and molten metal flowed, says this urban search and rescue worker. Red hot steel being pulled from deep within the pile. What did the first responders and demolition workers say? Peter Tully, president of the guy who's supposed to clean up all this stuff. He saw pools of literally molten steel. He's calling it molten steel. It was dripping from the molten steel, seeing the molten steel. What's the problem here? Steel doesn't even begin to melt until 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. But the fires, according to Eiger, were 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. They don't have any evidence for fire temperatures, by the way, over 600 or 700 degrees. NIST claims 1,800 degrees. Either way, it's well under the requirement to begin to melt steel. Where could it be coming from? We're going to be looking at a suspect called Thermite. Before we get to that, let's listen to John Gross, lead engineer of NIST, tell us about the molten steel from his perspective.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, there's no eyewitness who says so, nobody who's produced it.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
There's no eyewitness who says so.
There are actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall.
The cleanup was very difficult. The steel was coming out red in certain areas from the first couple of weeks at least.
Nobody who's produced it.
This fused element of steel, molten steel.
Nobody who's produced it. Nobody who's produced it.
NASA pictures, thermal images show those sorts of temperatures in the basement.
I know of absolutely nobody, there's no eyewitness who says so, nobody who's produced it.
What's the problem here? Somebody's lying. Why would an official representative of NIST, agency for the government, be telling us that there's no evidence? Because it can't possibly produce it can't possibly be produced by the fires. The fires just can't produce it. So the official story gets the rug pulled out from it. We're talking about a whole new ballgame then. Well, what are we talking about? But is there chemical evidence of explosives in the steel? Well, let's take a look. Could thermite have produced it? What is thermite anyway?
Thermite, an incendiary used by the military. Thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel. We know that open-air fires cannot burn hot enough to melt steel, but metal had melted at the base of the towers. Appendix C of the FEMA report describes sulfur residues on the World Trade Center steel. The New York Times called this the deepest mystery of all. Sulfur slightly lowers the melting point of iron, and iron oxide and iron sulfide had formed on the surface of the structural steel. Sulfur used with thermite is called thermate, producing even faster results.
This is getting pretty interesting so far.